I'm Mark De Grasse, and you're listening to the AI Branding Podcast, where we talk about branding, marketing, content, and the integration AI of all three. Today, I have a very special guest, Christene Marie. She actually specializes in the emotional intelligence behind marketing. And as AI starts to take over all of the kind of boring robot work that we've been doing, I think really focusing more on the stuff that makes humans, special. The emotional side is actually the best way to move forward in terms of developing your profession. So, welcome, Christene.
Thank you, Mark. It's so good to see you. We met in person just the other week for the first time, and it was fun to actually meet you. We've been talking for the last 2 years, speaking at different events, but we actually had never met in person. So I'm thrilled about this podcast and the impact you're making in the digital space. But even beyond that, we were talking earlier about how applicable AI is for all of the niches, for every industry. So much more beyond just the digital marketing space, which is where we kind of first met. I love seeing how you're applying this everywhere. So thank you. It's an honor
Oh
to be
wow!
here.
Thanks you for coming on. I think it's so funny because I talk to a lot of people and I'm always like, I don't know which ones I've met in person yet. And then
I
sometimes,
know.
and you even look at stuff, well, because I see you're at like events and stuff. I'm like, I think I was at that event. Like we probably
Yes.
but that's how it is these days. But I will say that I do think that the event side is going to get so much more important, and just seeing people in person,
Yes.
just because of all the deep
Completely
fakes
agree.
and what's real anymore. That's going to start getting
I
pretty
know.
confusing.
Gosh, Mark, people are so hungry for connection today. I mean, they're starving as they scroll,
Mm,
as they're on their social media constantly, as they're getting so much input of information. It's almost like the crux of the filter has been bottled up with so much information that the filtration system is broken
mm.
and the outputs are disparate and loneliness and all of these things that are just really due to the convoluted upper funnel that just has so many inputs. And so I completely agree. The event space is so important, and I think that a lot. I love that you're doing your events in person too, because the hands-on experiential like literally feeling or typing and just having someone over your shoulder to say yes, no, maybe this, be creative. And the creativity piece is also interesting as well. And this actually speaks to the EQ, the emotional intelligence piece that you were mentioning as we started. Creativity flows when your emotions are free and when you actually are vulnerable, in a state of vulnerability. And a lot of times at events, if you're really able to proceed in an authentic way, your creativity is just going to blossom because you're allowing yourself to truly be present. And when we're sitting on our phones, when we're sitting with all these inputs, it's hard to have something new come out,
Mm.
right? Because our filtration system is bottled and it's broken. So really being able to get into a space, whether it's an event or just literally removing yourself from your physical environment to allow for new inputs, but also outputs,
Mm.
allowing for time to process and the creativity to flow from there. Because that's where, I mean, gosh, AI needs a really solid input to have a really solid output.
Oh, that's you made so many great points there. But yeah, 100% agree. I think and I do it myself. I was just saying how before, I haven't been going out to go do all the speaking gigs I was doing earlier this year. And personally, I feel like, oh, I'm so much more comfortable. But in terms of developing content, getting new ideas, like just a one
Yeah.
hour social event with other professionals, you'll get a million ideas more than you
Yes.
focusing with a notepad, for
Oh
a
my
whole day, maybe.
gosh. Yeah, it's so true. I was in Austin the other week, which is when I saw you, and I had a dinner and got some folks together one night while I was there for a knowing dinner, and it was cool hearing just the meaningful conversations that we had, but then also, man, this personal or professional problem, how they went about
Mm.
changing it, and then being able to apply that to my own life. Because apart from just that space, that curated space to have intentional conversation, business or otherwise, it's really hard to get deep on a topic. We hear really high level things like the
Mm.
15-second reels or 30-second reels, but we're not going deep. So we're flooded with all these ideas and it's like overload. How do we actually put this into practice? Let's focus on one thing. I was talking on another podcast the other day and I was just mentioning the simplicity of surveys and how important they are. And he was like, really? There's not something more
Yeah.
fancy. And I was like,
Sophisticated.
no, it's the easy. I know, elegant. We avoid sometimes the most easy, simple, yet because they're easy and simple in terms of tactics, we avoid them because we want to do that which is flashy or cutting edge or new. And so integrating how to use AI with the simplicity of our existing tools, I think is really, really powerful.
Oh, it's huge too. Well, and I think again, going back to like you're just having conversations around the table. Like it's not curated content, which is actually what we're being
Yes.
given all the time. So something that
Yeah.
you may
That's
not have
so
even thought about,
true.
like, oh, hey, here's a tip of how I manage my VA to like really free up my time. You wouldn't go looking for that necessarily because you have your own procedures. Like, yeah, if something's not
Right.
broken for me personally, I'm like, I'm not going to change it because it took long enough to
Right.
find this solution. So I'm just not even going to think about it. And even if there is a better solution, I'm going to try to not hear it until you
Yeah.
finally do. And you're like, oh my gosh, that's so much smarter than what I was doing.
Yes.
So I think it's,
Yes. It's optimizing.
yeah. Well, and it's randomness because I think it's kind of
Yeah.
like, yeah, the internet has all the data and AI has all the answers, but it's like if you don't know what questions to ask or if you're not, feeding it
Mhm.
new situations all the time, then you're really not getting
Yeah.
anything useful out of it. You can just get what you already
Right.
know. Maybe elaboration on it.
Right. 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 And the human to human connection piece, just going again, that dinner events, having those moments with other people. It starts with us being centered and grounded. And Mark, you're doing that right now. You mentioned you're like, man, I'm in this really peaceful state where I am being creative. And so I think it's a both and it's not one or the
Mhm.
other, you know? So it's, have I taken the time? And you even mentioned, a year or two ago when you first really started taking that time for you, everything changed. And emotional intelligence has two definitions, but it's in one. So the
Mm.
first half of the definition is the ability to be aware of, understand, and convey one's own emotions, and the ability to handle interpersonal relationships judiciously and with empathy.
Mm.
And when we hear the word emotion, it's like, oh gosh, I don't want to be emotional because frankly, there's been a lot of, I guess we can say, shade thrown on emotions over the last millennia. And
Forever.
really, we're like coming out of that, this generation. I really believe, we see a lot more people in therapy today where there's not that stigma
Hmm.
around it. I think people are
Definitely.
more open than they've ever been to therapy and therapeutic practices and healing. However, when we think about emotions and the EQ with our like centered and grounded in the right brain, creativity flows from there. There's a lot of other things associated with the emotional aspect. When you think of poets and artists, they're deeply in their emotions and their creativity is unique and breathtaking and ultimately what is their skill in their craft.
Mm.
And then we've got the analytical left brain, but never does one function successfully in an isolated function of those brains. We need both to be integrated to allow for the full-fledged human experience. And so the more we're actually viewing emotions as something negative and to be avoided as weakness, which is frankly where I was 3 years ago. I
Mhm.
really viewed emotions as weakness and really stuffed them down, bottled them up to the best of my ability. And in releasing the emotional brain to be activated, both I got to know myself. So it starts with me. It starts with me taking radical responsibility to know who am I so that then that creative spark that's unique to me is able to shine. And that's where a proprietary brand comes in. That's where we're able to really shine and stand out from our competitors. So we have to have our emotions activated and flowing through us in order to make those emotional connections that are absolutely necessary. Harvard found that 95% of purchase decisions take place in the subconscious, which is where our emotions live.
Mhm.
We have to awaken our emotions and give them freedom to exist. And obviously, there's the emotional component of ourselves and the second half of that definition, which is thus the engagement with others.
Mm.
So knowing how to engage with our brand on an emotional level, ourselves on an emotional level, and our audience on an emotional level. And that's where the emotional connection, which really lends to brand loyalty, retention, the spreading of the word, referrals, which is the best kind of marketing. That's where the magic happens. But if they don't feel the emotional connection, What then do they have to really sell? They're going to be buying based on the emotion and telling and selling on the emotion as well.
Oh, that's such a excellent group of points. I'm like, oh, that was good too. No, but the emotional side, and I was in the exact same boat where I was basically like, no, emotions are weakness. A professional will be able
Yes.
to ignore their emotions and make their decisions based on principles and
Mm,
discipline and whatever you want to say. But you're just denying yourself, like especially if it's something like your business, which at the academy we always talk about your vision is actually the most important component of your branding. And people usually just
mm,
make up like, oh yeah, save the world, like whatever. And I'm like,
so good.
no, your vision
Yes.
is first. And the person who needs to buy into it the most is going to be the owner of the business. Because if they don't believe
Mm,
it, if they're not emotionally invested in it, there's just nobody else has more on the line than that person. And if they're not emotional about it, how could you
absolutely.
expect anybody else to be emotional about it? And then you should be. Like
So
you said,
good.
emotions are, you could try to deny them, but you are only robbing yourself and you're actually kind of
Right.
falsifying your decision making by ignoring that
Mm,
fact. Like, I actually hate this. It's like, oh,
yes.
gross. Stop doing it then.
Yes. Yeah, 50 emotions are 50% of who we are. And so if we're denying our emotions, we're denying 50% of ourselves, which is wild when you think about it in that way. That's why, 50% right brain, 50% left brain. The left brain doesn't occupy 80% of our brain, and then we have this little sliver of emotion, you know? And I love that you make that point about, well, okay, I want to ask you a question before I say this. With the academy and the vision piece, how do you guide people in terms of creating their vision?
Oh, there's two specific components. I tell people that it has to be
Okay.
ambitious because if it's not ambitious, essentially what the vision has to do is encompass the vision of everybody else in the company. And so if your vision isn't big enough
Mm,
to hold all that, those visions and objectives of your employees, it's not a
love
good vision. They're
that.
just going to have their own, and then they'll drive everything off of their own perception of what the vision should be. So it has to be super ambitious and it has to be quantifiable. And we say it has to be quantifiable
Mm,
in terms of the time frame. When is it going to be accomplished? And then some kind of
right.
quantity of what's going to happen. So at the academy, where hey, we're going to certify 20,000 professionals to be proficient in marketing with AI by 2027. And so it's oh, okay. Now you know what I do, you know what I'm, where I'm going, and just how big I
Right.
expect this to be. Now, am I going to do it?
I
I
love
don't
that.
know. But
Yes, you
I'm
will.
going to do it.
Right.
But if you don't have those kind of
Love it.
specifics, then it's just this wishy-washy, like we're going to help the planet, which is great. That's a good objective, but how?
Yeah. Yes, I love that. I love that it needs to be so big to encompass everyone and their objectives and visions. And one thing that was really interesting for me, I have gotten so much more clear on my vision, my mission, what I innately feel called to once I have done the work, that first part to understand, convey, and express my own emotions. Because our emotions, if we know what we hate, if we know what we love, those are both actually really critical. I found that emotional unhealth was the thing that I hated. It's
Mhm.
the thing that kind of wrecked uh, my previous relationship and just completely bottomed me out, right? It brought me to this place of where I was cracked open and it was like, okay, I've got to take radical responsibility to know who am I so that I can proceed from a place that is whole and healed. Otherwise, I know I'm going to become, the consequence of not dealing with these emotions is likely bitterness.
Mhm.
And so, if I want to avoid bitterness and maintain my values and who I want to be, I have to do the work to actually understand where am I right now and how is this playing out for me so that I can move through it. If you think of emotions as kind of like a tunnel, you have to move through the emotion to get on the other side. If you stop the emotion because it's a sign of weakness, then you're stuck. And we've got all these stuck emotions throughout our lives and throughout the ages of our childhood. And so, on the personal level, when it comes to processing the emotions, it's so critical to move through that. But what happens in that, identifying what you hate, what you love, you said earlier, like, well, if you don't want to do it, stop doing it. So often, my therapist asked me 3 years ago when all this kind of fell apart, he was like, Christine, what do you want? And I was like,
Mm.
I actually don't really want anything. I just want everyone around me to be happy. I'm good. He was like, well, okay, we'll back up. He's like, what do you need? And I was like, I don't actually need anything. I'm pretty good. I'm sufficient. I can take care of myself. He was like, well, you need food and you need water. And I was like, oh, okay, yes, I have basic needs. I'm human. But then as I started to do the work, I realized, wow, like I want people around the globe to experience emotional health so that their families can stay whole, so that communities can be founded and grounded in something so much less fragile and volatile than just the decisions of the people at the top who are emotionally unhealthy and like for the love of God, who's going to show up today? I had a boss who was a narcissist one time, and it was really good for me. You know, I realized how codependent I was in that, and at the same time, she had this level of excellence that I really learned and I loved. And I quit my job and started my own agency. And that was really
Got
important
out.
though, because yeah, like emotional intelligence translates on every front. So being able to lead with emotional intelligence, being able to understand the nuances of each person that you lead.
Mm.
What is the core motivation? We use the Enneagram to help us identify our audience's core motivations, but also our team. Emotional intelligence translates far beyond us. But the whole premise of this was that once I started understanding what I wanted, I got really clear on my vision.
Mm.
And so understanding what we want translates into clarity of vision and ultimately informs the way in which we lead the execution of it. And the integration of the IQ with that informs the analyzation of the process and the execution.
Oh, I love that. Well, and I love your example with your old boss because I've noticed that with some
Mm,
people, especially if well, we all have damage, but specific people with damage, where if you try to talk about a time in the past where like, hey, that was a really rough time, instead of them kind of
mm,
acknowledging like, hey, that was really hard. Like, even though my boss was teaching me a lot and I was getting a lot of benefit from it, it was also very damaging because the person was abusive.
yes.
And so, and what we'll do most of the
Yes.
time, if you're nice, you'll be like, well, I got the benefit, so the hurt cancels that
Right.
out. So I'm just not even going to acknowledge the abuse. And it's like, no,
Mm,
you don't. It doesn't mean you have to react to that, but you do have to accept that that was crappy. That could have been better.
yes.
That person is
Yeah.
probably also damaged and is probably acting like that because of
Mm,
their damage that they're not, acknowledging and accepting. So I love that.
yes.
Well, and that's
That's
all
so
about,
good.
the emotional intelligence. Because if you can't, well, if you try to justify past actions because, well, they were in a rough spot, they had a bad day, like you could hear it. You're just like, oh my gosh, you
Mm,
sound like a victim that is not accepting what happened.
yes.
You can't.
Mm,
How do you handle the next situation? Are you going to do this balancing
right.
act of like, well, the benefit outweighs the
Mm.
thing? It's like, no, just all of it's unacceptable. You could get
Yes.
education somewhere else.
Yes. And that's what I love about the second half of the EQ is that it's with empathy, putting ourselves in their position, understanding kind of their backstory, and with wisdom. So, how do and I was actually thinking this morning, like it's having compassion and taking wise action.
Mm.
You know, it's not one without the other. It's not tearing into them, ripping them apart, but it's doing the work to process for myself and then engaging in the interpersonal relationship, both with empathy and with wisdom. And I just feel like those are such good guardrails to
Hmm.
inform the way we engage in relationships, putting ourselves in their shoes and being really wise to ensure that I never find myself in that position ever again.
We have an amazing limited time offer that you won't want to miss. Introducing the Build Your Brand Pillars course from AI Branding Academy, your gateway to mastering both traditional branding and AI-powered marketing strategies. With this course, you'll gain invaluable skills in creating strong brand foundations that stand out in today's competitive market. Perfect for innovation leaders like you. Don't wait. Take advantage of this special offer before it's gone. Head to aibranding.academy.
So I think we've established kind of the importance of EQ and just kind of how the impact of emotion affects your everyday decisions. Um, how do you
Mm.
think people could kind of use this aspect to maybe build a better brand or be more authentic with their employees and customers?
Yeah, great question. I mean, gosh, look inward first, do the work first. That's really, really what I want to encourage your listeners to do is to do an audit of your of your own company. Look inward first, and then we'll talk about looking towards our customers. But how does emotion translate in the messaging that you have? How are you positioning your customer as the hero so that you're not stealing the spotlight and being a narcissist online?
No,
There's a lot of that these days. There's a lot of that where rather than serving and showing up as the guide or as the person who's going to help you relieve from this problem, will guide you through this experience, and it's you all along the way. Rather, it's me. And look at how great we are, and look at all the accolades we've gotten. Yes, there's so much importance to that, and that's so critical. But when we're thinking about the overall presentation of our social media, what do your social media profiles say? And what does your website say? How do your emails come across? What are kind of those core taglines of your brand that you consistently repeat over and over and over again in the messaging, in the visual content as well, in your creatives? How is that positioned toward the customer? Where does the customer fit into your story? And I really, really would challenge people to do a hard analysis of this. Does your customer actually show up as the hero in your marketing? Or are you the hero? And they're just sitting on the sidelines watching you shine. That is how a lot of businesses are functioning right now. And when we think about the analytical brain with the emotional brain being activated together, it is 100% incorporating those accolades that are necessary for thought leadership establishment. We have to prove we're the experts. And there's ways to do that, to incorporate it into your messaging. We want to help you like we've helped hundreds of thousands of other homeowners. That's a wonderful. We've healed like 5,000 homes in your neighborhood. Like we want to heal your home. So just really making it be about them and really positioning it so that they feel seen and heard. So number one, do an audit for your own collateral, your own messaging, and then send out a survey to your customers. And you first start with your employees. I got to tell you, Mark, I've done this so many times. We have this knowing process where we come into companies and do an analysis of their brand. We do knowing brand, knowing audience, and knowing data. And we go through kind of a sequential process, but we start with the brand first because we want to see how the employees view the company as well as leadership, because the boots on the ground soldiers versus the generals and commanders, is there alignment in how they're both talking about the business? Are the soldiers the ones representing the company? Do they really understand the heart and soul mission and vision of the company to thus be able to sell it well and get the buy-in that allows for retention way further down the line? And a lot of times there's a big disconnect. A lot of times the employers and soldiers actually don't understand the heartbeat of what's moving the commanders and generals forward. And what helps with not only retention of your customers, but also internal retention is when they know the why at such a granular level, and they feel impassioned about it. So to your point about getting emotional about the vision, selling it and positioning it in such a way so that it's memorable, so that your team knows what it is that we're going after. It's quantifiable, to your point. How close are we towards this vision and accomplishing it? Because then it allows them to be a part of something bigger than themselves. And another shift that we're seeing, not just in moving to this person-to-person dynamic where we are right now in today's culture, but we're also seeing a lot of times the Gen Z movement and even millennials. I mean, we're all looking for a why and a mission beyond ourselves, because this isn't satisfying us. Our phone is not satisfying us, and the social content that we're getting, the inputs aren't satisfying at the time. So where else can I turn to find something of value that will occupy my heart and soul? So really, employers and owners of businesses have this wonderful opportunity to bring their team, rally their team around them, whether you're small or large. I have a pretty boutique firm, and I gather with my team on a weekly basis, and we gather around the mission, and we talk solely about the mission, and then we'll talk about our clients. But really get around the mission. How far along are we? Like, let's have a checklist of our quantifiable goals for ourselves. We do this for our customers. Let's do it for ourselves. What are our internal KPIs, and how are we tracking against them? Maybe an internal KPI is that we get one positive testimonial a week from our clients, or we get a Google review or something like that. The practices that we're so faithful to execute for our clients, how can we do them for ourselves to gauge the engagement of the audience? And the next piece of this is, okay, knowing our audience, knowing our brand, doing that audit first, and then knowing our customers. How well do we actually know them?
Mm.
We did this kind of in the second phase of the knowing process. We went through sending out surveys to the customers and to the employees, under asking them, how do you perceive the customer? So we got a really good understanding specifically from the sales team about who are you selling to? What are they worried about? How do they feel when you show up at the door? All these questions. We asked very similar questions to the audience, and we found very conflicting responses. So the salespeople really didn't understand the customer the way that they thought. Now they were still able to convert, thank goodness, but we were able to take that information and say, "Hey, you think that their number one fear is this? It's actually not." It's so that changed the entire approach of the way that they went about doing their business. One other thing, I remembered this that I want to emphasize. When you're doing your audit, go through the messaging of how every single person in your business is positioning the business and talking about the business. So are the salesmen talking about it differently than production or the call center or the actual form that they receive in their inbox after they make the purchase? So really pay attention to, again, those key phrases, but also the way that you just kind of talk about the business. When you actually do the work, I had this done the other week. I had one of our clients call through every single phone number that they have across every single ad everywhere in their business. Because I called in on a Saturday afternoon and I was like, I'm just going to kind of pay attention to the voicemail. I just had this idea. Don't tell anyone I was working on Saturday. But I was like, I think that they actually had the wrong voicemail set up. So it's those little nuances that we never think to check. But what emails go out? What's on your thank you page? What's everything that's hidden in the dark corners that, frankly, is really the first time that someone's truly experiencing you after the first conversion, whether it's a purchase or a lead form conversion? Pay attention to those because you really want to delight them. We ended up putting a thank you video, and actually VSLs are really good at this, the video sales letters. They're really compelling, and there's something about them that really get buy-in. So even though we may not be an e-com business, maybe you are, and if you are, definitely do video sales letters. But on the thank you page, we actually put a type of video like that because the next round in the customer journey was that the client had to reach out to the customer and had to get a hold of them. So we set the expectation for what's next. A strong brand always sets the expectation for the experience they're going to have. So weigh that in as you're reviewing your marketing. Are you setting the expectation for the next step? You don't have to sell the whole process, but the next step that's going to come so that you're prepping them mentally. I think the human brain has like a 7-second attention span, less than a goldfish now. So we really have such a short attention span, and we really need to be talking to our audience in a manner like that. I can keep going, Mark, on the audience side, but I know that I just said a whole bunch, so I'll take a pause.
It's so funny because like everything you said, because the reason I had to build the academy out of branding was because I was like, any action you take has to be branded, because if it's not, you're essentially wasting opportunities and impressions on not only your customer, but also your employee. And that's why it's like, well, people think that branding could just be like, oh, it's just your logo and it's your brochures and it's your colors and your fonts and stuff like that. I'm like, no, it's literally anything that can happen between you and a customer or you and an employee. And then you said all that. And I'm like, exactly. It's like, if you look at the emotional side, yeah. Why shouldn't you inject everything with emotion if everything might lead to the sale or the retention of a client? There you go.
Absolutely. My gosh, I completely agree. Even the chat bot. How is the chat? What's their first, like, hello, how can I help you? Is there something that you can say that actually sets you apart from all the other chat bots that they're going to see on their competitor websites?
Oh, yeah.
The reality is, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say in terms of chatbots, because I always tell people too, it's like, people think good branding is pretty, but it's like, no, good branding is consistent. And so if it's a chatbot, and let's say that you're like a hardcore tactical, equipment thing, instead of saying like, how can I help you today? If it said, what do you want? That would actually be reflecting the emotional, resonance of the brand. And then it's good.
So good. Yeah. Tell me what you want.
What?
That's so good.
Just what with a question mark.
What?
I'd be like, I'd remember that.
I love it. Yes, me too. Well, and that's the problem. If you don't know who you are, as a person, but as a brand, if you don't know the ethos of you, your personality, if you haven't done the work to actually define what is our, and I really mean this, and I think Mark, you've talked about this a lot too. What's your voice? What do you sound like? Like visualize your brand, and I'm sure you take folks through this exercise in the academy, but like my goodness, make your brand visual for your team so that they have a person in mind when they sit down and they're writing. A lot of times we only talk about doing this for your audience, but do it for your brand so that you can show up as, you know, Mark De Grasse, the warrior in the tactical company or whatever it is, you know, like you've got that persona that you know to write to. That way, if you ever want to hire offshore, if you ever want to hire someone from Canada or so, you know, people in a different vicinity than you, or it's even just a green junior staff member and they're taking over social media because unfortunately we're putting social media in the hands of these young green kids who know perhaps social media because of their own usage, but not necessarily the best practices in terms of interpersonal skills, much less so the unique platform. So the stronger your brand is in terms of the work you've done to know it, the more you're going to be able to teach it and rally the emotional support from your team, not only for the purpose of being consistent across all fronts, but also for retention and growth for your business.
Oh yeah. Well, it's you know, it's kind of interesting because the AI thing, everybody's like freaked out. Oh no, there's not gonna be jobs anymore. I'm like, no, there's gonna be jobs, but the skills that used to make us all kind of special and unique to businesses are now going to be democratized, where it's like, yeah, anybody can
Yes,
write. You know, anybody could make data crunch and
100%.
do listed information and cool reports. So the thing that we should focus on now is how can I find people with the same emotional connection to my vision, and now I
Yes,
could build a company, and it's not dependent on like, oh, well, I
yes.
had to hire Steve because he knows Excel really good.
Had to hire Steve. Yes, I know what you mean. And to that point, when it comes to AI and the activation of it, I think it's really worthy of exploring. Okay, well, and actually, I was just talking about this on a mastermind. Um, you know, being able to produce 1,500 social media posts for however many days, right? Well, now it just takes the person time. Now they have the ability to have the quantity with the quality,
Mhm.
right? Before it was kind of like you had to choose. Do I choose quality or quantity? But now AI writes it for you, and now the person's only job is editing. We
Mhm.
still need the people to edit the social posts. It's so apparent to me when people don't do the
I
editing
know.
and just put it out there, and I'm like,
The
oh dear.
emoticons everywhere.
I know, so bad. And so really just paying attention to the editing now, we really can have both. And so we now can finally have the EQ and IQ working together in a way that allows for growth on these channels that have been so manual in the past.
Mm.
And that's so wonderful. So I just don't want people thinking, oh, we've got AI writing our social.
Yes.
Yes, and don't forget about the quality assurance process of that, because really that could be the first experience and impression with your brand. It
Mhm.
very well could be on social. So you really have to take your social seriously if you care about the brand consistency piece of it.
Yeah, well, and the cool thing is if you get an emotionally connected, say, social media manager, you'd be able to say, okay, well, this person's
Mm,
on brand. Everything they say is on brand. That's why I hired them. And now,
yes.
even though the social media
So
post might be
good.
written, now I could have them focus on the comments, or I could have them focus on the
Yes.
engagement, which still keeps them
That's
employed
so
and
good.
doing people work. And that's the part with AI that I always laugh at, because I'm like, man, you should not automate stuff that matters, like talking to a customer. You know, that's
Yeah,
too dangerous.
I
uh
know. It's so dangerous.
have
I
people
love
working.
that point. I know. I love that point too, because to your point of, you know, now we can move away to the laborious task is done. They can do the edit and now they get to engage. So to that point, one thing that I think we forget about when we have a brand online is going and intentionally moving, not just responding to our own comments and engagements, but moving into other people's networks and engaging with them on their platforms.
Hmm.
So find like-minded, value-aligned companies, whether they're a competitor or not. And I do mean this. if we can show up and really serve, even on our competitors' networks, if we are able to come in and serve and maybe even mention them, I know that this is like scary advice, so we have to be careful and wise with how we would do this. But if we're at the point where we have an abundance mindset surrounding our business and the work, and we're not operating out of this like, oh my gosh, but what if they take my one sale? It's no, there's enough to go around. And so if I'm really having a heart to serve, well, technically we could do that service, but we're actually sunsetting it because it's not our area of expertise. Our competitor actually does that. So let me keep you with this, and then I'm going to do a warm handoff to the competitor. And then now we're able to leverage their entire network. Because if you can start posting, so this extends beyond your competitors, obviously. The competitors are kind of like, should you include them? That's a question for you in your business. But for so many other influencer brands, for so many other companies, you engaging with them, and let's take LinkedIn primarily as an example. I really, really love LinkedIn for one of these reasons. If you, so let's say Sally posts a comment on a brand's post, and then I post, you post, your wife posts, and then someone else posts. Sally, in her email, gets a notification every new comment that comes in. And we've all seen this, right? We all receive those emails from LinkedIn saying someone else commented on the post you commented on. But we don't realize that, well, now I just showed up in someone else's inbox. Like, that's amazing. My name is in the subject line, promoted by LinkedIn. I've got the blue check mark, like, oh, wow, this is really interesting. So the more time we can start taking as brands to engage with other people's comments and their posts, the more we're hopefully able to serve, but also we're able to leverage that presence and get very visible and seen. So take time to do a social audit of the other brands that are like you, and see, man, maybe they've got an audience that we can really tap into. The ideal is not necessarily to go after your competitors, but if you're able to serve, don't be shy.
Okay.
Go play in the same sandbox.
And honestly, if you're doing things right, then you're going to find your ideal customer, and they're going to find their ideal customer. And those are different people most of the time.
They're different people, so long as you have a proprietary brand, you know who you are, and they do too. Because to your point, I will never be doing the exact same thing as someone else if I know who I am and I'm operating in that, because they're not me. So the clearer we are on who we are as a brand, and the people behind it, because the people are the power with AI propelling us forward. And so the people are really those unique differentiators, because they might be using the same AI tool as me, but if we know how to hire smart and position the people, to your point, not doing the laborious tasks, we've got AI for that. Let's move into this next phase, this next like transcendence of our businesses to take us to the next level by putting the right people, like-minded, to your point, which was brilliant, like-minded on the vision, like-minded on the emotional kind of veracity over that which we're pursuing. And then we really can shine as a brand because we've got the right people in place, powered by the right technology.
Yeah, love it. Well, and I think that's the future. I think it could be scary, like, oh, all the jobs are gone, but it could be good. Oh, all the crappy jobs that we never wanted and everybody hated are gone. And it's like, no, you got to just talk to people, have fun, and find a business that you actually want to support. That's my dream. I think it's going to take a while, but with people like you out there, it could be way sooner. So thank you so much for coming on the show, Christene. It's always fun to talk to you. I think you have a very genuine approach to everything that you do online and that you do with your clients. So it's what everybody wants and needs right now. If somebody wants help, where can they find you?
Christene Marie, Christene. I'm a Christine, not a Christine. I need to come up with like a little E versus I thing.
That's a good slogan.
So it's easy and memorable. ChristineMarie.com.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. Excellent advice. I know we didn't talk about too much about AI, but we mentioned it in there, mainly that AI is providing the capability to get more emotional. And that's a good.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mark. It was wonderful to be here.
Thank you. And thank you so much for listening. This has been the AI Branding Podcast, where we talk about marketing, content, branding, and of course, AI. If you want more content like this, please subscribe.